Hello there everybody, thank you for the amazing reception on the first episode. I ran a poll on Twitter to decide which character I'd cover next, and the winner was Bryan Fury. I'll be using Twitter to decide polls for future characters, so feel free to follow me from the link below and subscribe to catch future episodes. Bryan Fury is iconic. The cyborg kickboxer is synonymous with precision, calculation, and conditioning. Violent, scary strikes and that crazy taunt are what give Bryan a vicious reputation as not just one of the most entertaining characters to watch, not just one of the most terrifying Tekken characters to fight against, but also one of the most demanding Tekken characters to master. Although Bryan's known as an explosive and deadly conditioning character, he's also just as good at playing defensive, evasive keep out with moves like back 1, 3+4, back sway, while standing 3, side step launches, forward 3, and the list goes on. In truth, only masters of Bryan, and critically masters of the taunt, can play Bryan with tenable offense that has garnered so many fans of Bryan's like Jimmy J. Tran, Dinosaur, and of course, Knee. So, let's take a look back at Bryan's starting point, how his style has been upgraded and refined over generations, and the legacy he's carved out in the Tekken scene. Welcome to another episode of Pro Tekken History. Here we go. Starting off in Tekken 3, Bryan is the replacement for Bruce, and although he's got a sick design, he didn't have a strong start in Tekken 3. A lot of his best tools weren't introduced yet. No back 1, no forward 4, no down back 2, no punch parry. What Bryan does have are a lot of strong, fast mid pokes to control close range neutral, and his mark breaker, an excellent fast long range whiff and block punisher that gives a free downfall on hit. Bryan's great at capitalizing on aggressive players' mistakes with evasive mids, magic 4s, and his low parry that gives a free orbital heal. His 1+2 evades all highs and throws to deal a nice chunk, or you can back sway and whiff confirm a launch with his sway and slash elbow. Once Bryan's conditioned the opponent not to overcommit with these evasive tools, he can start employing pressure with a running 3 that gives a free mark breaker on block. This sounds amazing, but in reality the opponent can usually react to running 3 and sidestep it, and Bryan doesn't have many tracking options. Bryan also doesn't have many strong lows. He has down 3 and down 4 which are quick and relatively safe, but he has nothing like a hatchet kick in Tekken 3 to scare the opponent against the holding back. So, Bryan can't easily force opponents to play his game. They can just backdash away from danger, especially on a life lead. And now we get to Bryan's biggest weakness. Look at that standing block punishment. Kickers players think they have it bad. No full launch until 25 frames in is awful, and although mark breaker is nice, it's not easy to use as a perfect 13 frame punisher at all. Crouching block punishment is a little bit better, while standing 3 is nice, but still no crouch launch until 19 frames is way below average. Even Bryan's juggle damage is below average. When he does get that big read on a huge counter hit launcher like counter hit back 2-1, the opponent definitely feels it, but it doesn't happen often. Is Bryan the worst character in Tekken 3? Definitely not. Is he bottom 5? Probably. It's hard to talk too much about matchups because what little that is available on competitive Tekken 3 is focused on the viable characters like Jin, Ogre, Heihachi, Law, and Xiao Yu. What I can tell you is that Bryan's good at punishing long range moves like Paul's Death Fist and Heihachi's forward 2 with Mark Breaker, but his lack of tracking means characters like Link can just run circles around him unchallenged. And he's simply outclassed by the likes of Jin and Ogre. Bryan has nothing to stop him from enforcing their overpowering mix-ups and power moves. Tekken 3 Bryan is very much a prototype. It's not a great start, but things can only get better from here. Bryan's general playstyle is still largely the same as Tekken 3, but he gains some key moves to bolster that playstyle. His back one is a mid-tag launcher, and for some reason when buffering the tag, the move becomes +7 on block. This alone makes Bryan extremely scary in neutral, as Bryan's opponent doesn't even want to block the move, let alone get hit by it. He also has his forward mark kick, a safe and slightly evasive whip punisher that you can use liberally in neutral. It has priority over jab strings and can be buffered on a tag in to stop opponents who are late to the tag punish. Bryan's while standing 3 also got a significant buff, as its counter hit gut stun is now inescapable, meaning landing a counter hit while standing 3 leads to a free back 1 that hits standing for a full tag juggle. While standing 3 tracks to Bryan's right, and Bryan also has his own safe evasive side step button in side step 2. Bryan also has all of his great string mix-ups like 3-2-1-2 and 3-2-1-4, plus the counter hit confirmable 1-2-1-2. He still doesn't have many great lows, but the risk reward on his counter hit heavy, poking and evasive style is considerably improved, and this brings him up to B tier. However, block punishment still leaves a lot to be desired. He hasn't received any buffs here, so as long as the opponent catches on to Bryan's timing, they can be risky in their move choices if not their playstyle. Bryan prefers to evade the opponent's offense rather than blocking it. This does benefit Bryan with how fast paced tag can get, but if the opponent can get through Bryan's waves of pokes and evasive moves, Bryan can't do much to punish deadly 50-50s. And just quickly, when it comes to partners, there's only one that really makes sense for Bryan: Bruce, to make team knees or team kickboxes. Bryan starts the match with his superior neutral, including evasive moves and his great tag launches, lands a back 1 or counter hit while standing 3, and then in comes Bruce to deliver a half-life tag juggle and continue the press with his own offensive mix-ups. It's a simple but effective strategy. On to results, and Bryan did have a few. Mike from the States placed 2nd at the Tag World Championships in April 2000. He lost to Seokdong Min from Korea, although Mike's primary team was Kings, and Bryan was a secondary along with Julia. Likewise, Mad Dog Jin from Korea placed 5th at EVO 2003 with Bruce and Bryan. However, when the going got tough, he swapped to Jin and Kazuya. These are the only recorded Bryan results in Tag 1 I could find, but there are many more strong Bryans who certainly have results that are lost to time, such as the UK's Chef and Dinosaur, and Australia's Tony T. Tony is a Bryan, Lei and Lin player who was considered by many to be the best Bryan in the world at the time. At one point he travelled to Korea, and footage exists of him fighting several Korean players, and he more than holds his own against them. Unfortunately, there's no specific recorded accolades I can mention, but Tony has some fantastic sets that are worth trying to find if you're interested. He also has a long but relatively overlooked legacy in fighting games, and I believe he's still playing MK11 to this day. And speaking of legacies, a young man from South Korea called Jae-min Bae started playing tag, and since his team was Bruce and Bryan, he adopted the alias Knee.
ポイント取ってきます。さあ陣のつくも、さあ陣のつくも、さあつくもだけに無前メリュー、1000年の、敗北、1000年間無敗の、つくも。さあこちらはさあ初の父となるかつくも。さあ陣押していきます。さあ今度は、SD ネット。さあ陣に。さあ大量囲むさあシャガパン下キックさあ西国攻めていきます西国攻めておいさあいらしていきます
Because of a movement nerf in Tekken 4, the game is primarily played in ranges 0 to 1, which is where Bryan excels. He has amazing fast pokes and strings to mix up opponents, strong tracking moves in forward 4 and down forward 4, and great plus frame tools like back 1 and forward 3 to put fear into opponents. Bryan still has the same fundamental weaknesses that he has in Tag, namely subpar lows and slow launches, but those aren't as important in Tekken 4 due to the poke-centric gameplay. Bryan will perform death by 1,000 cuts on an opponent, dissecting them and conditioning them with his strings and demanding respect with the high damage launches he does have. Bryan also gets a full launch off of a generic low parry due to back 4 launching crouches. Bryan's standing punishment is still below average, but again this isn't as important due to the way Tekken 4 plays. What is important is his tremendous juggle damage. Flip over Oki still exists in Tekken 4, and Bryan takes advantage of it due to his down 2 always causing a flip over. This lets him get a dash up snake edge, which the opponent has to take as standing up results in a back turn launch, which repeats the cycle. When it comes to matchups, Bryan is very well rounded. He can hold his own against Steve, Nina, and even Jin in the poking game. Jin can parry Bryan's strengths if he gets a read on the Bryan player's timing, but Bryan has more than enough options to safely mix up and bait the parries out. The only matchup Bryan's weak to is Zhao Yu, as AOP goes under all of Bryan's tracking moves like forward 4 and down forward 4. Bryan has to go low to beat AOP, but he has no strong lows, meaning Link can just do whatever she likes. Fortunately, Tekken 4 is probably the least documented Tekken in terms of results. We know about many tournaments such as the UK, US and Japanese nationals, but the placements of these events haven't been properly archived. The only result I could find for Bryan was by SDZ from Japan, who placed tied third at SBO 2004 in Tokyo, a first to one single elimination bracket. He destroyed a vast number of Jins on his path, proving the character is not unbeatable unlike many in the West believe. He was only stopped in the semi-finals by a Zhao Yu player. If you know of any strong Bryans from Tekken 4 days, feel free to drop some links in the comment section below. Tekken 5 is the first game where Bryan became a maniacal powerhouse. He gained several new moves, but the best was his iconic Jet Upper, a 13-frame launcher in Tekken 5. This finally fixed the issue of his block punishment, actually so much it turned from a weakness to a strength, and it dramatically buffed his Okazeme. Bryan's had his iconic unblockable taunt and follow-ups from it since Tekken 3, but 5 is the first game where the taunt transforms from a highly situational setup to an outrageously powerful Okazeme setup. He can also do taunt 3+4 at the wall to get a splat. This wasn't the only reason Bryan was S tier. Another new move he got was down 3-2, which in Tekken 5 is essentially his down back 2 as an extension to his down 3. This is an exceptional wall carry, as Bryan can chain dash jabs into a down 3-2 ender for some of the best carry in the game. And Bryan's wall damage and pressure was just sickening. If you're against the top Bryan in Tekken 5, consider an infinite stage. The staple juggles listed below are max damage options, not max carry. If a Bryan player thinks they can make it to the wall, you'd see a lot of dash jabs into a down 3-2 to finish. Why is it so important for Bryan to make it to the wall? In Tekken 5.0, tech rolls have a few frames of complete vulnerability. They can't block. This means after a 1-2-1 at the wall, Bryan gets a guaranteed snake edge. If the opponent tech rolls, it will launch and Bryan can hit a down 3+4 too. So they have to stay grounded and take the hit. It's disgusting damage and leads straight into Bryan's signature wall pressure. Stay on the floor, take a low. Stand up, risk getting splatted by a taunt setup. If Bryan gets you to the wall, it could be good night already. When it comes to matchups, Bryan is very well rounded. His pressure game is more effective at shutting down some characters' mix-ups than others, but generally, Bryan's game plan is equally effective against the majority of the cast. The sole exception is Steve, solely because of the fundamental reasoning behind a pressure and conditioning playstyle, losing to a hyper-aggressive rushdown playstyle that can't be conditioned. That being said, the Steve matchup is nowhere near terrible. In fact, Bryan's one of the best answers to Pitbull Steve's by fighting fire with fire and going poke for poke. It's just that Steve is the best character in 5.0 hands down. However, Bryan has, in theory, superior matchups against the other two top 4 being Nina and Fame, although at that point it's more about the player's styles and knowledge that decides who's better rather than matchup traits. Unfortunately, again, not a lot of Tekken 5 tournaments were well archived, and many of those that were archived in text don't state the characters that the players were using in tournament. But from what we do have, Bryan had some very respectable placements. Japan's Deborah placed 2nd at SBO 2005, and Japan's Hato tied for 5th at EVO 2005. And for the first time this video, we see the legend Ni's name appear. He won Isu Theme Park in March 2004, as far as I'm aware the first major Tekken 5 tournament in Korea, and he placed 3rd at the Korean Nationals in 2005. But Ni was just getting started.
Final round. Fight!
Bryan isn't quite so crazy in DR. His main nerf is his damage potential. He no longer has the busted wall juggle, a lot of his juggle fillers got damage nerfs, and back one only launches on counter hit now. However, these changes basically highlight Bryan's strong suit, his forte: poking, pressure, and conditioning. Back one as a counter hit launcher makes sense for Bryan, and it gives a different meaning now. Bryan players aren't just throwing it out to try and launch anymore. When the opponent blocks the back one, they have to look at that long block stun, look at the plus frames, and comprehend that Bryan is trying to catch them. It's scary, it feels like you're being hunted. Bryan also got some nice new tools. A counter hit confirmable down to 3 for a nice chunk of damage, his quarter circle back 4 soccer kick, and his back 4 now guarantees a Mach punch in the open and a jet upper at the wall. Meaning torn back 4 is an extremely dangerous threat for opponents recovering at the wall. Bryan in DR feels right. He's not overtuned, he's a quick poker and a steady conditioner and pressure builder. All he needs now is a good low and he'd be optimized. Bryan did not have a lot of placements in DR, and I believe that's simply because he's a specialist character. That being said, Ni won Ultimate Tournament 8 in Paris with a mix of Devil Jin and Bryan, especially important as he took it over the dominant Nin. Shortly after this, Ni took his mandatory year in the South Korean army, so he had no other international results. The only other placement I could find was by a young Jimmy J. Tran, aka Mr. Naps, and making his first top 8 at EVO 2007. At the time, Jimmy was only really known across the West Coast as a strong Bryan, but this was about to change very soon.
지금 이제 유리한 건지 올랐어요. 배재민 한 라운드 남았습니다. 배재민.
자, 1세트에서 역전으로 승리를 얻었던 거 이제는 상대편도 그렇게 할 수도 있기 때문에 한 라운드라도 내주지 않는다는 그런 마음자세를 펼쳐야 됩니다, 배재민.
자, 배재민 타이틀 지금 이 세계대회 타이틀 1 첫판에서 지금 그 16강에서 배아픈 패배 그리고 서력전 더 나아가 결승 우승까지 지금 배재민이 너무 잘해주고 있습니다.
지금까지 많은 국제대회가 있었지만 국가대항전의 느낌이 이런 건 없었거든요. WCG 철거 국가대항전 이 느낌에서 금메달 바로 눈앞에 놨습니다, 배재민.
아, 그러나 지금 하나씩 카운터 허용했어요. 지금 여기서 아오 선수는 패턴을 걸거나 지금 또 벽이기 때문에 지금 뭔가 어쩌면 지금 좋아요.
하나.
한 방 나왔어요. 한 방. 짬날 한번 나왔어요. 짬날.
하나.
짬날 한 방 남았어요.
자, 라이트 비켜야 또 뭐가 나고 하나만 툭 치고 끝나요.
Tekken 6 Bryan is nastier than ever. He doesn't necessarily have anything that's broken, but his new moves completely throw out his weaknesses. He has an excellent new counter hit launching zoning tool in 3+4 and a powerful low in the scary quarter circle back 3 hatchet kick. He also has a great poke string in down forward 2-1, which jails in this game. Other counter hitting tools in forward 3 and back 1, poke strings like machine gun punches and jab strings, amazing wall carry, and his taunt setups. Yeesh. Bryan is an incredibly strong character who is S tier at the highest level. His only weakness is his tracking. Down forward 4 is his homing move and it's very slow, and the faster forward 4 is a -10 force crouch, usually unpunishable but still very minus. Otherwise, Tekken 6 is really the first game where Bryan is complete. Tekken 6 removed 8 frame jabs, which slightly nerfed Bryan's block punishment, but his 2-3 is still very strong. Bryan has a few ways to adjust his juggle, such as saving the bound of a wall by going for an extra long carry. Or in mid-screen, Bryan can stop the juggle early and dash forward. If a player stays on the floor, he can reflow with a down back too. If a player tech rolls, Bryan gets a guaranteed taunt attempt. This is a deadly 50-50 that is one of the main reasons Bryan is S tier. Bryan is not just scary of a wall anymore. Again, Bryan is pretty well rounded against most of the other top characters in the game. Tekken 6 had a lot of characters gravitating around the top 10 area with very few clear top characters in BR. Bryan had even matchups with Bob, Lars and Law, favourable matchups against Jack 6 and Nina, and unfavourable matchups against Steve and Julia in the top tiers. Characters who can outpoke Bryan is still one of his biggest weaknesses, but not quite so much in 6. Now we get to results, and well, there's so many placements we actually have to split it into 3. One screen for Knee, one for Jimmy J Tran, and one for everybody else. First, let's look at everyone else's results. Dinosaur got a duo of decent placements, 5th at SVB 2010 and 4th at SVB 2011. Sunship won Ultimate Tournament 13, his only international outing in Tekken 6. 3 Bryans were at NorCal Regionals 8th, the winner Jimmy J, and Kane placing 3rd, and Filthy Rich placing 7th. Filthy Rich also placed 5th at NEC 11. Japan's Bui Maru placed 4th at God's Garden 3, and finally Korea's Deja Vu placed 2nd at the World Cyber Games 2011. That was a lot. Now let's look at Jimmy J Tran, aka Mr. Naps. He placed 3rd at Strong Style 3. He won Devastation 2009 over Mad Dog Jin. He placed 2nd at the North American Championships, placed 3rd at EVO 2010, tied 5th at MLG Relay 2010, won NCRA, and tied for 5th at EVO 2011. Loads of respectable results over 3 years, including back-to-back top 8 EVOs. Finally, Knee's breakout Tekken. He won Final Round 12, won Dama Germany 2010, placed 3rd at Super NCR, 3rd at MLG Columbus, won a World Cyber Games 2010, was a runner-up at MLG DC, and finally placed 4th at MLG Dallas. Many of the MLG tournaments were stacked with strong American defense as well as powerful Asian superstars. Knee won almost every non-MLG event he entered, his proverbial crown jewel in Tekken 6 being WCG 2010, a very prestigious event in Korea, and the first time Tekken shared the screen with titles like StarCraft 2. And it was Knee and his trademark Bryan who established himself on a worldwide stage as one of the gods of Tekken.
A little bit of mind games going on between the two players.
And the crowd's
Final round.
The crowd's giving it up right now. They're respecting both of these players.
One big hit could change everything here. No grabs. Jimmy.
One of these players will go to grand finals. Who will it be?
Oh, both players are very nervous right now. A lot of drop combos, drop everything. But who will prevail?
Dragunov has rage. Oh!
A little bit of damage before the rage expires.
Oh, he went for it. He was feeling it.
This could be Jimmy's last chance. One combo will be enough for.
Oh!
This is what he needed.
He drops the combo.
What can Dragunov do?
We're about to find out. He has to do it.
Ancient. Almost close to the wall. Almost. A lot of tagging.
There's not much time left either.
Oh, what's going to happen?
Oh my God.
Whoa,
there's no time left.
Oh, wow, that was perfect. One final engagement.
Oh my God.
That's it. He thought he was going to go low and he didn't.
Bryan was slightly toned down in Tag 2. His 3+4 was no longer a counter hit launcher, meaning he had to go back to relying on the slower back 1 and the stubbier quarter circle / while standing 3 for his counter hit launchers. These are still fantastic explosive tools in a game as explosive as Tag 2. Otherwise, not much else changed for Bryan. He still had great wall carry and wall pressure, powerful poking tools, and a weakness in tracking which could be alleviated with a suitable partner. The other big buff for Bryan was his new forward 4-1, a nice mid-range whiff and tag punisher. In fact, Bryan also gets his old tricks of destroying slow or botched tag punish attempts by swaying on a tag hit and counter hitting with a quarter circle forward 3 knee or whiff punishing with a quarter circle forward 2 fisherman slam. With the amount of amazing, powerful teams flying around and an emphasis on simple damage with characters like Mishimas, Jinpachi, Ogre, Lars, Bruce and Capoeira teams being popular in tournaments, Bryan very much became a specialist pick. His damage doesn't come at face value, it comes later down the line when you have the opponent in an advantageous position or you've mentally conditioned them. Because of this, only Bryan mains stuck with the character. As Bryan is a specialist character, he can be fitted with polarizing characters who take the opposite role of Bryan in teams, or more commonly be paired with a similar character such as Dragunov, Bruce or Jack, who carve out a powerful team niche that fits the player's style. Dragunov is a good pairing due to their positive synergy, Bruce has maximum damage potential of a wall, and Jack has a tag throw with Bryan that can actually wall splat from incredibly far away. Other potential combos include Bob, Devil Jin, Heihachi, Marduk, Ancient Ogre, Paul, Steve, and more. On to results, and after a single runner-up placing from Malaysia's Kiba at IESF 2012, the entirety of Bryan's placements in Tag 2 came from Jimmy J. Tran, Inkognito, and surprisingly, Pokechop. That's right, Nee had already decided to put Bryan on the bench as early as Tag 2, not 7. When he won EVO in 2013, he used extremely cheap teams and played the tier game. So before we look at the results, we have to ask, why did only the Americas see Bryan usage? Part of it could be circumstance. Europeans resident Bryan, Dinosaur, didn't travel too often at this time, and despite his skill, his placements are not consistent. He's a slow burner who excels in long sets where he can analyze his opponents, not short first to twos. And Europe, more than anywhere, is the land of specialists. Players will find the characters who fit their style best and usually stick to him. The few tiered chasers in Europe had no reason to pick up a character with such a high skill ceiling at the top level like Bryan has either. Meanwhile, in Asia, there certainly were Bryan specialists around, but only the strongest and the lucky who were invited to events had any reason to travel internationally. This did not include Bryan mains. Also, many of the more open events in Asia were team tournaments. Events like IESF and the Global Championships were restricted in one way or another. So we're left with America. America has always been the land of Bryan players, and it's easy to see why. American players are traditionally known for being stubborn, and that's not my British prejudice bias talking or anything. Even players like Arsenal and Ash have said that American players, for example when in a mix-up, will always take the low to avoid getting hit by the powerful mid. They don't mind taking the lows because it's the best risk-reward option. But when those lows are Bryan handshake kicks and they start to add up very quickly, and you're constantly stuck at minus frames against a hyper-aggressive Bryan, something's gonna snap. It makes sense that Bryans can take advantage of players who have the most predictable style. Asians are analytical, Europeans are thoughtful, Americans are emotional. Of course this isn't a one-size-fits-all label, but I digress. Let's look at the results that are dominated by these 3 American players, as they tell an interesting story. First of all, let's look at the differences between Jimmy, Inkog and Pokechop. Pokechop is the outlier. A Bruce main who decided to pick up Bryan as his secondary in Tag 2 as it fits his Smash Mouth style. Jimmy and Inkog are 2 of the best Bryans in the world, and in Tag 2 they went back and forth results wise. Jimmy's secondary was Dragunov. Equally great movement, precise pokes, conditioning, wall carry, plus frames. Inkog's secondary was initially Bruce when he won SCR 2013 with Bryan and Bruce, but after this he swapped to Bob. Fast-paced mix-ups, poke strings, evasiveness, range 0 to 2 rush-down offense. The 3 players went to largely the same events, but who was better? Let's find out. Inkognito struck first with a strong win at his home region of SoCal Regionals 2013. As mentioned initially using Bryan with Bruce, although he swapped to Bob for the faster paced playstyle and stronger Oki, especially after tag juggles and for tag crashes. Pokeshop placed 3rd at CEO 2013 with Bruce and Bryan, while Jimmy tied for 5th at the Tekken Global Championships in October 2013, a lower place but at a much larger tournament. Moving on to 2014, and Inkognito had a streak of strong placements, 2nd at KIT, 3rd at SCR, 7th at Final Round. Then, both Jimmy and Incog attended Northwest Majors 6 in May 2014, and Jimmy sent Incog to losers swiftly. But Incog would fight all the way through losers and get his run back in Grand Finals. Then they played the full amount of games, a 3-2 reset to Incog, and finally a 3-2 win for Jimmy, at that moment solidifying himself as the stronger player, but only just. Meanwhile, Pokeshop placed 7th at CEO 2014. At EVO that year, Jimmy placed 4th and Incog 5th, although they didn't face each other in the bracket. At Norcalstrom Style 5, Jimmy placed 5th and Incog 7th, just slightly behind Jimmy again. Tag 2 was starting to wind down at this time with Tekken 7 slowly coming over the horizon, but there were still a few more placements to be had. Pokeshop placed 3rd at the Full Classic 2014 and in 2015, 2nd at CEO. Before Tag 2 came to a close, Inkognito and Jimmy fought one last time at Final Round 18 in the Losers Finals. This time, in the final round of the final game, Incog finally bested Jimmy. Although he fell short of JDCR in the Grand Finals, Incog avenged his loss and proved he and Jimmy were on the same level. In fact, just a month later at Northwest Majors 7, the two had the tiebreaker. 1 year after Incog's first loss to Jimmy, and in a tournament with all the best players in the States, Incog beat Jimmy in the winners finals and then won against Jimmy in the Grand Finals, a 3-2 bracket reset for Jimmy and then a convincing 3-0 by Incog. At that moment, Incog was both the best player in America and the best Bryan in the world. Incog continued to compete in pre-release Tekken 7, but we're only looking at 7 after its official release date. By that point, Inkognito stopped traveling quite as much as he used to, and eventually moved to the East Coast. But you'll see a lot more of Jimmy very, very soon.
Oh, yeah, and we're gonna go to our final round.
Oh my God, no, he's bringing it back. He refuses to go down. Jimmy countering
big
again.
countering. Not just that, it's gonna do a ton of damage. He's going for it.
Oh my God, the side system no be on point though. You cannot count this man out. Jimmy trying to put him away.
The shoulder out of nowhere.
Jimmy with the side roll. He's in a bad position though. No, he's got the wall.
Oh, it's not
Jimmy's got
looking good.
range. He's got range.
Oh,
Wake
gets
up
a
knee.
blow.
Wake up knee.
Is he gonna go for it? Range drive into the
thinking
shoulder.
So much.
One
No,
more
he
makes
got
him to
He's
do
got
it.
time of his own. He gets
Oh
him.
my
What's gonna
gosh.
happen? Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Who's gonna get this?
Here we go. He's going in. No, he blocks the mix-up.
Anybody's match.
He gets it.
Jimmy takes
He gets it. Jimmy J. Tran is going to the top 8 of the Tekken World Tour Final.
Bryan in Tekken 7 got some nice buffs. He got his 3+4 counter hit launcher back, as well as Mark kick screwing on counter hit. He also got some really nasty wall carry with quarter circle forward 2-1. He has a very fast armor move in Mark Punch, and his rage drive is so scary it makes people freeze in neutral until it's burned. So why did he fall down a tier if he got buffed? Bryan's weaknesses become more apparent, and in a game like Tekken 7 where your character's bad if they don't have everything, Bryan having any kind of weaknesses makes the character average. It's difficult for Bryan to stop people from stepping left as his main homing move is still slow. He has other moves like forward 3 and forward 4 to stop stepping, but if your opponent reads when you're going for a tracking move and when you're trying to take plus frames or mix up, they have the mental advantage. That being said, Bryan can literally just play like a bully with back 1, forward 4 and quarter circle back 3. Back 1 as a powerful turn taking mid, forward 4 to stop stepping, and quarter circle back 3 to open the opponent up. These 3 moves work in synergy to make Bryan effectively an RPS monster. Then you add moves like 3+4, forward 3, while standing 3, down 4-2-1 and down 4-2-3, machine gun punches, down back 3, sidestep 1 and taunt, and yeah, it just keeps going. That being said, when Bryan is on a frame disadvantage, he has to respect it. You don't always have the frames to match forward 2 and power crush, and he has no other turn stealing panic moves other than a hard read punch parry or a very well placed while standing 3. And lastly, compared to other characters in 7, until Bryan gets to 14 frames, his standing punishment is not great. His crouching punishment isn't amazing until 15 frames either in the first 2 seasons. Bryan has to condition the opponent to play his game just like always, but it's tricky for Bryan at Tekken 7 start. The block punishment is the same as it has been since Tekken 5 for Bryan, and it's fine, but it is slightly starting to show its age. As for juggles, Bryan has nasty wall carry, extra damage with a double knee float filler, higher wall splats, and his wall pressure is as strong as ever. We're showing off a max damage wall juggle option, but you can go for a down back 1+2 ender at the wall for extra frame advantage to set up a free taunt on a tech roll. Bryan's rage drive is always a strong juggle filler too, and it just adds chunks to Bryan's damage potential. Against the top tiers in Season 1 Tekken 7, Bryan does fine. The big 3 in Season 1 were Dragunov, Deviljin and Jack. Bryan's a counter pick against Jack, and he goes even with Dragunov and Deviljin. Bryan's problem is getting to the finals of tournaments to be able to excel against these top tiers. Bryan has even to negative matchups against a lot of Season 1's mid to mid-high tier, including Katarina, Law, Steve, Paul, and so on. Unless you're Jimmy or Knee, maining Bryan in Season 1 Tekken 7 is too high variance to always work, because almost every character in the game has ways to get around, and more importantly, straight up avoid Bryan's game plan. Moving on to results, and we have a lot to talk about. In the inaugural Tekken World Tour, several players had top 8 success with Bryan. First, let's look at the sub picks. Bryan was Take's original main, but he demoted to Take's secondary, being replaced by the incredibly consistent Kazumi. Still, Take used Bryan in some tournaments like Rev Major 2017 and the TWT Korea Masters 2017 to help him get some strong placements. Lohai also very occasionally brings a character out, such as at EVO 2018 for a single set against Congo Jack's Master Raven. Indonesia's Meat also got a few strong results, Bryan along with his Jack being his 2 mains. We also have a very small teaser of the future. Pakistan rose to prominence in 2019, but Bilal was already strong enough to make top 8s at international major events 2 years prior at SEA Major Malaysia 2018. Otherwise, the 2 players you expected dominated with Bryan, Knee and Jimmy. We're only listing replacements where the player actually used the character on their path to victory, and not necessarily when they used the character successfully. That being said, Knee used Bryan in more events in 2017 than you might think. He had the Deviljin, Steve and Paul on lock, but he definitely brought out Bryan in a lot of scenarios and had good success. You can see his return to dominance start with a win at the inaugural EVO Japan, the surprise Bryan pick at the start of Grand Finals against his teammate Chanel being a distinct moment. And then we get to Jimmy. Of course, Jimmy had extremely strong and consistent placings across all 3 Tekken World Tours, so he won't dwell too much, but some highlights include winning the Americas Locked Regional at DreamHack Denver and coming top 8 in the 2017 Tekken World Tour Finals. Bryan received very minimal changes in Season 2. His key nerfs were only really to moves that you wouldn't throw out in neutral anyway. Buff-wise, Bryan appreciates the extra plus frames after back 1 and block, which means they're not stepping after, and if they try to power crush after, they can get stuffed by fast moves. The taunt tracking buff is really nice too. It makes going for taunt a little more consistent in some situations. In a year's worth of placements, Knee and Jimmy consistently placed. There was a second top 8 in 2 years in Malaysia for Bilal, and the beloved Dinosaur made an incredible run to 5th at Versus Fight in 2019. Knee brought Bryan out in a couple of high-profile matches during his streak of dominance, most memorably against Rickster at Combo Breaker 2019. Finally, Jimmy continued getting respectable placements. Bryan got a plethora of buffs to frames and damage in Season 3, along with a new 13 frame while standing Punisher that knocks down and does huge chunks of damage. This fills in one of Bryan's weaknesses and also just massively improves his quality of life. extra frames to limit options after certain situations, and in the case of down 2, now make the move outright viable and worthwhile to add to Bryan players' repertoires. The hatchet kick buff was the most important. One extra frame of hit and a damage buff to Bryan's most important and spammable load is something that adds up and up and up during a set. All these small changes certainly added up and were enough to bring Bryan back up to A tier. Again, Season 3 only has a limited number of tournaments to analyze due to COVID, but 5 Bryan players made top 8s in Season 3. Jimmy J. Tran continued placing well leading up to the finals, although he had a disappointing performance at the finals itself. Meanwhile, a NorCal Bryan known as AccuMajor made his presence known at SoCal's Electric Council, making top 8 and actually sending Jimmy to losers in the Bryan mirror. Although Jimmy did get his revenge, Bilal made his mark on the world scene by winning the 2019 LCQ with both Akuma and Bryan. He also didn't perform well in the finals, but the LCQ was so insanely shark infested that it's an incredible feat in its own right. Season 3 brought Knee back to Bryan in a big way, as Knee felt the buffs were enough to consider Bryan a main. Lastly, with a nod to the future, I'm being a little lenient looking at non-TWT events in 2020 and honouring ties respectable top 8 at Winter Brawl in February of this year with both Bryan and Marduk. And that's it. Overall, after Bryan's rather incomplete moveset and gameplay in Tekken 3, after then, he just kept getting better and better. His game plan became more refined, he kept getting new moves that benefited it and laid out a strong niche in Tekken's overall meta. A master Bryan player is a rare sight, but certainly one of the scariest sights in Tekken. One of Bryan's biggest flaws that we haven't actually talked about isn't really a specific game weakness, it's an archetype and human weakness. Bryan's game plan is all about poking, keep out, counter hitting, and when you put those all together, conditioning. This requires information that is hard to collect quickly in a short tournament set. This, as well as his incredibly high skill ceiling at the top level, is why I maybe respect expert Bryans more than any other character main. Bryan mains, at least not counting 5.0 Bryan mains, don't take the easy top tier path. That's not to say the character is bad by any means, he's almost always been strong and has a place in the meta. But the character's potential takes a lot of skill to unlock, both physically and mentally. Deciding to become a Bryan main, unless if you're straight up talented, is a struggle. That's not to say that you can't win in tournaments without knowing how to taunt your upper, but what I will say is that every single Bryan player who appeared in this video can and has done it in tournament. So, to finish, a message to any Bryan mains out there. Thank you for being an inspiration, for picking up one of the most iconic and fun Tekken characters to watch do their thing. And please, don't taunt your upper me in tournament. It hasn't happened to me yet, and I don't want it to happen anytime soon. Thanks for watching.